I'm so glad to finally be doing a Power Query episode.
I know. I know. I'm surprised. I'm still surprised it's just not as utilized.
Excel's mysteries, discovered and uncovered.
Jack and Dim.
The Excel files.
Trust. No cell.
Welcome to the Excel files, because the truth has no #ref errors. We're here to talk about those Excel skills you won't see in your office. We're deep in the world of competitive Excel, and yes, it's a thing. We like to talk lambdas, robots, and secret tips and tricks. I'm Jack Kennedy, and I'm joined by world champion and triple European Open winner, Dim Early. Now, we took a short 5-month break, and some cheeky young upstarts took over our niche podcast slot. So today we're joined by Sheets and Giggles star Ashleigh Roberts, first person to be shown using Power Query live on a battle stream. She has competed in arenas from Las Vegas to Amsterdam, is mum to Top Dog Hank, and always comes bearing cookies. Welcome to the podcast, Ashleigh.
Thanks, Jack. Longtime listener, first time caller or guest, I guess you could say. I've been a big fan for a very long time, and thank you for the very generous intro. But I'll take it since you mentioned Hank, so you know.
Today we'll be discussing Power Query in competitions, and if that's what it takes to make Oz happy. But before all that, to round up everything that's happened in, I don't know, the last 5 months or so, it's time for everyone's favorite segment.
Step right up and take the stage. It's time for Dim's Golden Age. Ain't it great? Esports athletes share their flair. Dim's Golden Age beyond compare.
Take it away.
Okay. I feel like when we were doing episodes once a month, it was like, take a deep breath, this is going to be high speed. Now it's like 5 months of catching up to do. So, since our last episode, what has happened? Well, first, regular stuff. There's been 5 MEWC rounds and a new one coming up this week, including a few first-time winners, Daisuke and Washington, both first-time winners. Alexander was briefly #1 in the world, but I think German has already overtaken him. There have been 5 FMWC rounds, including one that's going on right as we speak. And again, a few different, I think I was #1, and then Zhang took over, and then Michael took over. It's been choppy there as well. There have been 5 FMWC, or no, sorry, they're not called that anymore, Excel Esports Brazil rounds, and a 6th one coming up this weekend. There have been 3 rounds of the UK tournament plus a warm-up case. There have been 2 actual rounds of the DAC tournament plus 3 warm-up cases. There's been a bunch of MECC stuff, including some like fun reduxes of like classic MEWC cases. There were some Spreadsheet is a Nightmare, Fantasy Excel, something else, and then a bunch of other new things as well. Whew. So that's all happened. That's just, the regular, the wheel keeps turning. Then on top of that, we had the European Open, whole new big thing, 2 days of competition all day long, many different events. I hear someone did a podcast, so I'm not going to attempt to cover all of that. Actually, there's a Sheets and Giggles episode, and there's a Lorenzo Lounge, both deep diving on that. Tons to say there, but yeah, great to see everybody for a second time in the year. Then we've had a bunch of community cases, so there were like, I think on approximately consecutive days, or maybe even the same day, both Zhang Yunyi and Li Shengyo / Arvi put out Mahjong cases. Arvi has done a bunch of other cases around the kind of daily puzzle games that we're all obsessed with. So there was like maybe 3 different ones on the LinkedIn games. I'm not even fully caught up on those. There was one on Clues by Sam. Lots of cool stuff. Valley did one on Airplane Battleship. Hadang did one on RSA. Karim did a couple. He did Shithead as a standalone community case, and he also did a director's cut for his UK case about shuffling. And James Ty did a like super in-jokey but hilarious one based on Harry's experimenting with what do you call it, OpenClaw. And that's just, that's just in some sense the one-offs. Then there's some, kind of bigger event stuff. So obviously there's another podcast now. Woo! Sheets and Giggles. There's also like 3 new platforms on which to play Excel since we last talked. So Liana and Sean made one for the Harry tournament with Harry's Siders, Watson, and Gross all contributing cases, and then Julien Lacaze as an honorary Harry adding a 4th case. All super fun and interesting stuff. And there's a new tournament coming up on that platform, which is the Benevolent tournament with Ben's Carr, De Leon, Gutcher, and Benny Weber. I think kicking off next month, maybe. I lose track, and I say that as one of the people who keeps closer tabs on these things than most. Then there's also Thomas Marcello's new add-in Excel Master that has like a bajillion little bite-sized challenges of various levels, and is a place where you can add community cases. And Gabe just published one based on the Eurovision Song Contest. I haven't had a chance to try that yet. And the Madagascar team have put up their own new platform in which they have a like launching case as well, which I also haven't had a chance to try yet, but that's going on. Hayden just did his wacky speedrun case for the community event last week. Very cheeky. Loved it.
Yeah.
And then I don't know how, we might need to kind of cut some of these out if they're still under NDA, but there was talk of a possible, Jack Attack tournament coming up. There was talk of a possible Benny and the Bobergs coming up. There were even whispers that there might be a Titans tournament coming up. So yeah, lots of new things going on. This year started off a little slow compared to last year, and now I feel like it has rapidly accelerated, and we're definitely firmly back in the thick of the golden age.
Jeremy Freelove once said, "It's less of a golden age and more of a renaissance." I do believe.
I'm not
Love
sure
it.
Renaissance would make for the same jingle kind of effect.
I was just actually thinking that. I was like, how would you? But anyways, yeah.
I for Tim's Renaissance.
Renaissance.
No.
Yeah.
That is
Hear ye, hear ye.
It was impressive. That was a lot to cover.
I know, and wow. Dim, that was wow. Do we have a count of how many cases there are in all of that? A rough.
Well, so of the ones that have come out so far, hang on. So like since our
January.
last episode, this is not even like some of early this year was before our last episode, but since our last episode, we're at 68 cases between MEWC, MECC, locals, FMWC, community cases, works. Actually, I think there's a couple I haven't put in my tracker yet. So yeah, call it 70.
Wow. That is
And
impressive.
signs of acceleration rather than deceleration going into the second half of the year.
All right. Now, Ashleigh, I've held out on sharing your jingle because I generally tend to dump them all at the beginning, and then we've got like a long bit of talking with no jingles in the middle. So we're gonna like get your jingle in now.
I'm equal parts like excited and terrified. I'm gonna be really honest. Like, and I don't have a poker face, so it's gonna hide nothing.
This is the first jingle that comes with choreography. And producer Johnny said we have to commit to this like Cam, or he's cutting the whole thing.
Jim said, let's ungroup in mixed doubles. She dropped Clippy in the bubbles. Oz cried, Power Query, look at that, yes. Ashleigh's got Power Query, open and press.
Now we go.
In sparkly green Excel robot shoes, she's Power Querious. Ashleigh Roberts, golden boy Hank, sheets and giggles with top energy. She has Clippies in her pocket.
that was delightful. And so, like, as you can probably gauge by my, I couldn't contain myself laughing reaction at one point. A+, Jack.
I went for a certain style of artist that I know we both enjoy. I think I nailed it.
That was a banger. You've
Oh,
had some
yeah.
good
Well,
ones,
actually,
but
that's not what I heard, Tim. I heard, I'm so sad I did not participate in the choreography segment. I wish I would have done it. I'm going to do it by myself at some point and make somebody else record it. That's what I heard. I don't know.
interesting. Folks be out there saying.
Okay. Now for the main topic of discussion today. Ashleigh is Power Querious. First up, let's hear what Oz had to say when you guys paired up for the mixed doubles and Ashleigh came out with some Power Query in live competition.
Power Queries. Look at that. Ashleigh with Power Query open.
Oz's day is
Yes.
made. Thank you very much, Ashleigh.
Oh. It makes
I'll
it
keep
so
Oz
easy to
content.
parse data. You can split into rows.
This is true.
Yes. You can do that with a split text in the grid.
Yep,
But
you
it's
absolutely can.
It's so much easier to do.
I guess you'll get that.
Because you just got buttons to push. You don't have a formula to get the syntax
You don't
right with.
Get stuck in arrays and some multi-line formula.
And then you get a spill error.
So Oz has been waiting for this moment for years.
I'd just like to note for the record that there is room in this world for people who like long, complicated array formulas and Power Query. Hello.
That is something that I would write, like, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, but like that is always something to keep in mind. Is it is one of many things in the tool set that accomplish a given outcome you're looking for. It's not better, it's not worse, it's just what do you need to get done and how much time do you have to think through and to start something, because that's, yeah, it is one of many things. And there's so much overlap now with lambdas.
This is the main topic of conversation. This is where we get into the meat. I mean, what was it about that case that triggered you to pull out the Power Query under competition environment?
Yeah, so and the only thing I still kick myself, and it's funny, those who were there know that I was very, very frustrated after that case got over, to the point where, like, game got done and I still give me another 8 seconds and I had it. And it's one of those things where I use Power Query religiously in, like, my day-to-day work, because I'm pulling data from multiple sources. I'm joining, I'm splitting, I'm massaging it into something and the output that I need. And I need to be able to go back and figure out my steps along the way many times. So without having to remember what I did, it's very easy in Power Query to understand, much like recording a macro, right? If you're trying to learn how to do something and the first time you do anything related with macros, you click that record macro button and then you see the code that it spits out. Power Query is a lot the same way, because it's going to, every click you make in the user interface, it's going to spit the transformation out with the syntax on the right hand side in the transformation steps section. So you could go back and effectively learn what it was doing, but you are just working in the visual side of it. So to me, it is best used for anything that is a traditional, like, data table type thing. Anything you need where you want that visual view of pivoting, unpivoting, anything where you have two input lookups, it's a very good thing for. So, like, traditional attribute type things, like I think a sommelier or the Harry camping case, or multiple tabular data sets, really. And the thing for me, and why I still kick myself for it, because I should have thought of it sooner with that mixed doubles case. And it was the easiest way to approach. Take this paragraph, split it into a column by sentences, and then duplicate that column. And on that duplicated column, split the sentences into words. Then duplicate that column and split that column into letters by word. So you effectively end up, and each of those steps along the way, basically you're just creating what would be like an index identifier. So sentence one retains the one when you duplicate it, and you have 10 words for sentence 1, but you have word 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then you have, right, so each of those things, you can, if you can retain that index, you can group them back up by those things very easily. Something like that is going to take several different multiple layers of dynamic arrays with parsing and potential for, I always get tripped up on like vector versus single cell versus array inputs into dynamic arrays, right? Like that's a common hurdle that many people deal with. So for me, especially when you're dealing with nested things that you need to accomplish with it, my brain likes visual learning, right? So if I can see the transformations that are happening, and because I've been using it for so long, I'm very quick at it. That's and there's settings that you can change in Power Query so that like enabling the fast data load setting, for example, is a big one that not allowing data previews to load in the background, just little things like that may be initial hurdles for people who they tried it once and they went, it's too slow, I could never do that in competition. With a couple of tweaks and like anything else, repetition and practice, right? It can be just as effective of a tool as anything else that, exists out there for competition. So yes, long-winded answer, but day late and a dollar short on the actual execution of it, but it was the perfect, practical use case for where something for Power Query really, really shines for the use case needed there.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop making you guys suffer through that again. And go for a more general Power Query discussion. So I know actually you did come up, you've got a file that you are willing to share with our guests, which will include a link below in the YouTube. If you go on our YouTube, if you're on our Spotify, we'll maybe add a link in the description. But first up, my thing with Power Query is the slow data loading. So what are those settings? What do you change so that you can use Power Query a lot faster than what happens by default in real life?
Yeah, so there's two big ones, and these are sort of hidden or nested in, you have to be in the data tab itself. And then from there, you're going into Power Query. So data source settings, I believe, or wait, query options, just kidding. Okay, I have a tab in that file with actual screenshots of what the settings are, but the biggest one, if you remember nothing else, is in the data load tab. There's two settings on there. So background data, the setting is never allow data previews to download in the background. And so really what's happening with that one is as you're making transformations in the UI, if you have that setting enabled, it's constantly caching what it thinks you're attempting to do, what you've actually done, and it's trying to show that to you in real time versus make these changes and then show me the result at the end. So it's almost like on old school pivot table settings where you could delay the visual application of it if you were working with like we run into it a lot with like our SSAS cubes and things like that, where there's just so much crap going on. And it's like, to be really helpful and try and show you the preview as you're going along. I don't need that. I just need the result at the end. So that's what that setting does. And then directly under it, there's another one. It's under a heading called default query load settings. And you check the box that says fast data load, which miraculously does exactly what it says. Your queries will take way less time to load. And think of this like, again, back to the macro thing, screen updating equals false. Think of it like that. So pulls all the data from the Power Query UI, and when it's done calculating, it displays it. If you don't do that, it does the same sort of thing as the loading data previews in the background. Pulls data in, caches it bit by bit, shows it little by little in the grid, and then you finally get to the end result. Whereas again, I don't want that. Just pull it in, stick it in the grid, and then show me the result at the end and turn the screen back on, if you will. In screen updating equals true is sort of what that one does. But it is, when we're talking fast data load, we're talking fractions of the time that it takes to do those things. So if you are experiencing slowness, if you're like, I'm sick of waiting for things, to show up, and that's slowing down my time to finish and solve and things like that. Like it is most likely those two culprits, to be quite honest. You'll get the biggest performance gains from those two settings alone. There's a couple other ones that you can tweak, but those two are definitely the 90-10 rule, if you will.
Now, you did mention you're also a fan of Power Query.
I think I've ever used it in competition, but like for comparison, when I was writing my thesis, I remember someone showing me a chart that's like, complexity versus word count. And it's, word is like super low, but then slopes up quite a lot, versus LaTeX is like much higher to start, but then quite flat because it's designed for big things. Like, I think Power Query in competition is a very tough sell because what makes Power Query great is the repeatability, I'm going to set this process up once. I'm going to just do this process once, but in doing it, I'm also building something that will run it for the rest of my life. And you don't get that in competition at all. It's like the whole nature of it is you do it once and it's done. So yeah, I think it's a like comparing Power Query off what it can do in a 30-minute competition is tough. But like in real life utility, it's huge. I mean, I still suspect that my best Excel work ever has been done in Power Query. But unfortunately, it's all, super duper top secret stuff that I never get to share. So nobody has seen that, and they've just seen my grid formula stuff, which is like not bad, but I think my best work was in Power Query.
Yeah, I agree. And it's one of those things too where it's like, again, with the introduction of lambdas, the ability to the number one thing I used to use it for prior to lambdas was unpivoting, right? So something that's already in a matrix like format, you need the attributes that are spread across between 1 and 400 columns in some cases, and I just need them in a tabular data set, long and skinny versus short and fat, right? That sort of a thing. Lambdas have obviously made that somewhat trivial in some cases, or if you're using OA robot, things like that. But I think for people who like just using the unpivot or unpivot other columns or pivot data, those three functions alone in Power Query helped me years ago for sure, more so than now. But splitting text to columns, cleaning data, you can now split by uppercase versus lowercase, anything again that you can do with a text-based lambda function, you can do in that grid too. You can do sequencing, you can do group sequencing. So there's a mod function, right? It is all just about, like, if you had to use no lambdas whatsoever and you forced yourself to get to the same outcome and figure out how to do that in Power Query, it's 100% possible. But it, again, like anything else, you're not just going to be able to do it. Well, you might the first time you look at it, right? You have to understand what it's doing. There's also hidden parameters with some of the functions. There's unpublished functions that are actually very useful. There's table summarization functions. So it's 2 clicks to get to what would be comparable to your most of lambda dim, for example. But again, it's all about knowing the outcome that you need to get to and the tools that you have in your tool set. It's definitely not applicable in all situations, but anything where you need to stack data, like the dot case from yesterday, for example, where you have team 1, team 2 scores split by a colon delimiter. And if you need to know all of the games and the scores that a team ever played in, but you don't want to go between and go, okay, we'll sum this up if they're in team 1, or they could be in team 2, right? Like the mental load of just going, I'm going to stack it all into one big data set. I think it took me 4 or 5 seconds to do that in Power Query yesterday and get my output. And then I was able to have the original data set, my transform data set for this purpose, and I was going back and forth between them depending on the use case that I needed. So that's the other benefit too, is being able to have that dedicated thing for a subset of questions. And as you need to do other things with it that are more complex, you can base, your references off of that, or you can build something else too. But yeah, anywho, clearly I'm a big fan. But like I said, different ways to do it. You can get to the same outcome. Just depends on where you feel most effective and which one has the most flexibility for the purpose of the need.
I think my history has always been I started working in an environment where we were working with millions of rows of data. And for many years, my VBA was primarily, a lot of my VBA work was to process that data and group it in such a way that it could be displayed in Excel. That was until Power Query came around, and you could do that a lot more easily. So my experience of Power Query has always been, I mean, I absolutely think it's a massive game changer. I haven't needed to use VBA a tenth of the amount that I used to back when processing all that data and having to do it programmatically. So having Power Query be able to process that is great, but it also means that a lot of my experience with Power Query has always been on massive data sets. And it's not so much for me about being able to do quick manipulations and get certain information, like, as you mentioned, the most of lambda equivalent for that, and being able to get certain features quickly. It was more about clustering and grouping of data in such a way that I can then work with it. So I can't really kind of get the switch in my head working to understand why. I think I may have tried to use it once in a competition, and I was just like, nah. I think Leanna and I once took a bet that we were going to try and use Power Query on the next battle. And immediately afterwards, Leanna was like, yeah, sorry. I bailed out on that as soon as I saw the case. I was out, and I was like, damn it.
Well, you will love the file that I put together then that we'll share, because I, in just a few minutes, right, went through some of my case history and my solves and things like that. And there are, wait, one, two, three, four, five, six. I can count, but I can't read. There are 6 different, very different context-wise cases that I found that I pulled out the exact subset of the data that's provided and how you can apply Power Query to it. Like even some things like the Wild About Harry case, counting and grouping apples. So how many, if it takes 4 apples to make 1 glass of cider, you have a text string of 37 apples long, right? It's again 2 clicks in the user interface, 1 change in the formula bar to split by 4, group by 1, sum up, and then get to right.
Yeah.
So that's an easy manipulation. But yeah, there's 6 different cases. I pulled the dot case from yesterday. It takes more than 1 because obviously I want to relive that pain myself and never do what I did ever again. The social network is a great one actually, because it again, Power Query can, the only thing Power Query can't read, if you will, there's 2 things. One, colors or formatting, it's not going to be able to pull that. And cell references, unfortunately, you don't get where things came from. You just get, here's the grid, here's the used space, pull out the actual what lives in the cell, if you will. Yeah, social network, Wild About Harry, actually Elf's Christmas Catastrophe, and then the World Cup is ours, because that one is a good example of where you have multiple headers that you need to unpivot basically, which again, totally possible, but then there's also a join that's involved there. So do these things to this data set, grab this other data set, left join it, if you will, to that to pull in more descriptive things and give me one final big ass data set that gives me the flexibility that I need to answer many questions about it with it in this form. And it is a mindset change too, right? Because many people are used to writing a formula that solves a tiny little piece of something and doing that in a repeated way for each level or everything that you do. Whereas the mindset that you have to have sometimes when you use Power Query is, like me, for example, I do a big scan of all the levels. And if to me, it looks like you, like, it takes more than 1, the mixed doubles case is a great example because 3 levels all depended on having your data model or the output spotlessly correct at the beginning, or you wouldn't be able to solve any of them. We don't see them. I don't think we've ever seen one like that, to be quite honest. Like I literally could not answer anything until I had that output perfected to begin with. So again, maybe there's some PTSD coming through, but anywho, right? Like, and so what I'm getting at is it will take you more time to set up your data set at the beginning, but the gains are instant in being able to solve if you have that transformed data set and the flexibility that you have there. But you've got to get over the fear of, oh my God, it's taking too much time. I'm doing these things. Like, and again, that's a practice, that's a repetition, that's in being able to identify when it's useful and functional versus when it's just too much bulky overhead that something else like a Lambda or whatever else would be more applicable for. So, but yes, different contexts, different representations, different data sets, but all examples of how you can use it in those different ways depending on what you come across and what you see.
But just, I mean, back to what Jack said a minute ago, like my first use of Power Query was exactly that. It was like, here's a bunch of data that I have been kind of, aggregating and transforming and blah, 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 with a mix of formulas and VBA, and wow, there's more, the data is getting bigger, there's more sources coming in, this is getting, starting to creak. I was like, okay, I've heard of this Power Query thing, I think it might help here, and went off and found it. But one thing that I really noticed, and again, similar to what you described, is like the shift from processing data with VBA to processing data with Power Query is like the shift from using a workaround with band-aids and staples and stuff to hold it together versus using the tool that was actually designed for it. So like the big one is, how often does your source system throw in an extra couple of columns that might not all be at the end, they're somewhere in the middle, everything is moved around, but because Power Query is used to operating based on names, it's like, this is totally fine, there's still a column called X, there's still a column called Y, I can still do this, nothing changes. And like every time that happened in the VBA land, it was like, oh crap, okay, let's go fix this again or rewrite it or whatever. And it was just a lot more friction. Oh, and the other thing, I don't like really recommend using this, but just out of that certain kind of interest. When you mentioned that Power Query can't read colors, I don't know if you ever saw this. I came across a blog post a few years ago where someone had found a way to make Power Query read colors by like opening the Excel file as a zip file and parsing the XML data inside it. It was insane. I mean, it was very much like, let me take my sledgehammer because I have a fly to swat. But the fact that you could do it was still so cool.
That actually makes so much sense. I've quite often ripped apart my Excel files as zip files and use that for troubleshooting size issues normally. But
Yep, same. But now we have a way robot for that. So, And I'm actually no, it does for sure. When you do the basically break the workbook apart into its contents, it does actually parse out and give you a sub-diagnostics for the M code that's in there too. So it does handle the Power Query portion of what is that XML package and its content. So something fun to tinker with.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, to close out the chapter on Power Query, what I'm actually adding as a bit of a segment is that I'd like to finish on real world applications of our niche Excel topics. But with Power Query, I feel like this is more real world use than competitive use for once.
Yes. I mean, I think it's like you said, in this case, it's the much more niche thing is using it in the competition. The much more standard thing is using it in the real world. But it's also like, I do think it's probably the most under-taught, under-known Excel skill versus the value add. Like, if you look at some of the things that people routinely get taught in like introductory courses, in advanced courses, whatever, like there's a lot of, weird, you might use this sometimes stuff that gets thrown in there before, like, hey, learn to use, but like, you were saying about the learning curve, but like, compared to learning to write complex lambdas, like click around in the Power Query menu and you'll get a lot done. And you can do a lot just by kind of exploring and like, hey, there should be a way to, oh yeah, there's a button over here. There's some stuff, some pretty cool stuff that you need to, be able to edit the M code or something to get to, but there's a lot that you can do with just the UI.
Yep, for sure. And I think, going back to do you remember, like, it's like I remember my first beer. sort of analogy, like my first use case, right, for Power Query was it came from a place of pain and frustration. Like for me, anything where humans are spending their intellectual capital, I'll put it this way. So I work in the energy industry and the natural gas side, mostly commercial industrial sector. And when I say that there is no regulation around standardized data formats or outputs or file types or what has to be included in them or anything like that, like I'm not kidding when I say that. So very early on in my career, 10, 11 years ago, like one of my first jobs as a forecasting analyst, if you will, was I had to go get all of the customer consumption files. So the usage, how much natural gas did they use day over day, in what unit of measure, different conversions, many different things going on, right? And the company that I work for interacts with over 120 different utilities and pipelines across the US. So for every single utility, you had the potential and likelihood for a different structure of the data set. I got CSVs, I got text files, I got PDFs. PDFs were more common than any other format when I first started, which is nightmare inducing. I got Excel files in both XLS, XLSX, XLSM, XLSB. So like everything that you can think of there, anything that came out of an Oracle system was absolute garbage. And those who have seen those file types, like, I'm sorry for what I just triggered mentally for you, because I know the pain myself. But anyways, like I was doing the same thing every day, logging into a website, putting in my username and password, going to a thing, downloading a file, putting it in a folder, opening up that file, copying certain columns, filtering certain, like, and so what I wanted, and I worked with, I had 6 different utilities at the time. And so what I wanted to be able to do was grab all that data, get it to the output that I needed, stack it all into one data set so that I could load it into the system that I needed to without taking 2.5 hours every morning to do it, right? I wanted to be able to come into work, sit down and have that data ready so that I could spend my time analyzing it rather than the manual, like my value and my worth as somebody to my company is not in the number of buttons that I click, in the number of copying, pasting, and like my worth comes from being able to identify the patterns and do something with it rather than the other side of it. And Power Query was, I would not be where I am in my career had I not had that mindset of, is there something out there that allows me to get things in different format, apply certain transformations, and output it in a way that saves me time and effort and is repeatable. And that's exactly what Power Query offered. And it was just, I mean, it was like dangling the carrot from there. It was, what else can I do with it? So then it wasn't just grabbing the data and transforming it. It was different, so connecting to our internal databases across different, you know, a MySQL database versus a Transact SQL database, and then you're connecting to, oh God, here we go again, an Oracle system, right? Like all of these things. Power Query handles the credentials and the connection parameters for you. You just have to know, right? Like if you're logging with a Microsoft account versus no authentication needed, and then if I want to pull in something from GitHub, right? Like all of the things that exist from a connector perspective, it's just, where are you getting it from? What do you need? And what do you want to do with it? And that's really all it comes down to in its simple form with Power Query. The answer is yes. What's your question is another way that I like to frame it. Mic drop.
I like that frame.
I'm going to close out Power Query chat. I feel like I might set myself a bit of a challenge just to try and at least solve a few more cases using Power Query instead of that one that I tried the one time, and see how that gets on, because I do Power Query 80% of the time in work. In fact, going back to what you said about the stuff you can do and learn when you should dig a bit deeper, at the last 3 conferences I've been at, Global Excel Summit and Active Cell conferences, it's always the Power Query training sessions that always hit hardest for me, because you can do so much more with Power Query than what you just do in Excel. And that, for me, has been the best learning curve, is learning more M code, learning more DAX, and using Excel like a database, which we shouldn't be doing. I'm going to drop you guys in this one. So we don't have a hot take. So hands up if anyone has a Power Query hot take. No.
I mean, Power Query hot take. Power Query should be mandatory, day one training for anybody who works in Excel. But that's probably not spicy enough within this group.
I'm not going to contest that. And nope, I couldn't take the opposition if you forced me to, because I don't know what it would be. Nope. Mm-mm.
Mhm.
Like to that effect though, too, like the question would be, well, why? And I would say that especially in a corporate environment, anytime people are collecting the same type of file, standardized file, you're collecting it from 3 different salespeople, right? And you get frustrated because you try to use Power Query, but it quote unquote doesn't work. My hot take is 99.9% of the time, that's not Power Query's fault. It's whoever you're getting that file from, because they've changed the header, they've changed the structure, they've put something where they shouldn't, and like Power Query only does what you tell it to. So fix the process, and Power Query will absolutely work. But it is the process and the humans, and not
Excel hot take.
I realize
What will they say? Is this array in disarray?
best work ever that I mentioned, like
Excel hot takes.
What I really liked in that was, like, this file had, I don't know, like 75 different queries that it ran once a week by the end of it. But the first thing that I would run every time was, first there was like one check that would make sure that all the files that were expected to be present were present. And then there were a bunch of other checks that would like say, are the columns that I need in all of these files, has this file, like, have any files like shrunk weirdly that are meant to be growing every week, or, they're meant to have data added to them, or other, like, tons of other checks, because we had, lots of systems underlying where, like, oops, we stopped reporting this one product, but nobody told anyone. It was like, okay, but I need to know that.
Yeah.
And so, like, every time something like that went wrong, I would just add a new check. And so I would, run my whatever dozen check queries as soon as I, like, first check all the files are there, and then run all the other dozen check queries, and it would say, oh, hang on, there's a new category that hasn't been mapped in this file, and there's, this file has shrunk when it's only supposed to have new data added every week, and this file is missing a bunch of things that were there last week, and everything else seems fine.
I think that is one of the biggest things to learn in Power Query after the initial I press buttons. And that's where I can see the code. There were 2 major learning areas for me. One was how to think of the data as kind of like lists and items in that list for pretty much everything. And it's different types of items. That changed my thinking when I kind of sat through Chandip's masterclass. But then the second biggest thing I think that really changed Power Query was error trapping, and being able to then go and think about, you're not always going to predict what your users are going to do, and know that someone's going to go and rename your columns in the file that you provided for them, or that they're going to create something completely new for a certain ID format or something like that. So as you say, what you were doing there was creating a lot of the checks as it went along with when you got those errors. But it's actually finding those errors in the first place and being able to kind of generate, hey, something's wrong here, rather than have everything fall over at once.
And that's such a good point to make though too, because usually when there's a human in the mix, right? I follow these 15 steps every day. I do these things. One of them is typically going to be, if you get an error at any point, if there's missing rows, if this value has 0, a human's deleting that data, right? So, and what many people don't realize is there's so much embedded context in that you probably need to know about, but you never will if somebody's just removing the data altogether and you don't ever see it. So for example, in the process that I was mentioning earlier with looking at utility data, right? If there was something that was built into a macro that said, if consumption value equals 0 or no, delete rows, right? And nobody ever saw it, nobody ever knew about it. And what that was actually telling you was something is wrong with the utility meter. It's not reading, because for natural gas, like, you should never have a value of 0 unless it's a backup meter or something to that effect, right? But like, 0 doesn't mean 0 and null don't mean bad. They mean it's telling you something else with that context. So that's something else where, again, value should always be blah. If not, put it in this other data set, subgroup it into this other query. I can't speak anymore. Right. But you can then have only the errors show up and keep going with the rest of it too. That's the other piece of it that's nice about Power Query. So yes, there's no such thing as bad data. Maybe that's the hot take. I say it, right? Like, I will fight anybody on this, right? Like, there is no such thing as bad data. Every piece of data that you get has embedded context behind it. But right, like, your subjective determination of bad, just because somebody fat fingers something doesn't mean it's bad. There's something wrong with the process with the user interface, right? Like, data is.
Is this like
That's it.
end user error?
Honestly, like that. If you're getting bad data, it's a shitty process, and I will fight anybody about that. Like, that's
I mean, it's fair, but there have been processes that I've created, and they're always clearly communicated, incredibly well documented, and I've laid them out in a way with big writing that says, put this value in this cell. And there will always be, and producer Johnny's done this himself as well when I gave him a spreadsheet one time. There'll always be that person that goes into the blue cell that you say, do not edit the blue cells, and they go into the blue cells and edit the blue cells.
Who are these people who don't read the instructions?
You. Nope. I would take the opposition on that, Jack. That is, again, not a data issue. That is a user interface issue, unfortunately.
So would you lock out every other cell and make sure that no one has access to do anything that's invalid data-wise?
It depends on how business critical that information is, and what happens if it gets to a point where, I always try to break my own shit too, right? Like, that's the fun part for me. Like, so those things. So the answer, as all things are, is it depends. But yeah.
I mean, I will say the one time that I had to do like a real large scale, like 2,500 or so people had to fill in, data in this spreadsheet. Like, we spent a lot of time thinking about how can you make this so that people can't break it, and the limitations of, cell protection and data validation and all this kind of thing, and ended up having the data entry occur entirely in a VBA form, because even if you could lock down Excel enough, because it's Excel, people's expectations were to be able to copy and paste and to be able to interact with it in a certain way and so on. And so even if you could lock it down enough, they would just find that frustrating. Whereas if it popped up a form, I mean, it was a whole other, project to make sure that it would pop up a form, even if they had macros turned off and downloaded it from the internet and blah, blah, blah. But once it popped up a form, they didn't have that expectation, and it, you could kind of more clearly direct them to, okay, here's a drop down, here's a, free text, but it will auto complete to one of these values, whatever. Yeah, I mean, that was a big project. It wouldn't be worth doing that for like, hey, can everybody fill in their 5 lines of expenses for the, company potluck last week or something. But if you really gotta do it, that's one way to do it.
I like that one. All right. Well, thank you for joining us today. Special thanks to Ashleigh for being a brilliant guest. I'm going to play that as we go out. Dim, I don't think you're in the screen share anymore, because we played hot takes earlier, and you're like, so what's going on in your lives? Where can people find us? I'm Jack Kennedy. You can find me at Exaltism Jack on YouTube. Hello, Dim. I heard that. Dim, where can people find you, and what are you up to?
I'm still on YouTube at Dim Early. What am I up to? Getting ready for all kinds of changes. We're moving house this summer, and My older kid is finishing elementary school, and yeah, all kinds of change coming up, but lots of exciting stuff too.
Awesome. And Ashleigh.
I'm what you would call a geriatric millennial. So the whole like pervasive social media presence thing is not a thing for me. The Sheets and Giggles podcast was my first towing the water into a digital format. So yes, I will give you the link to the Sheets and Giggles podcast. If anything, that's always fun. Shout out to Jeremy and Tim for being my willing co-host in that and putting up with me. Personal life, like we're heading into every day is a day closer to November and the finals. So sort of in official crunch mode for training and things like that, continuing on with that. Had some really bad business like just frustrating travel. So have a week off from that before I have to hit the air again, but hopefully it never involves me being airborne on a canceled flight ever again, which was some Bermuda Triangle style shit, if you will. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell. Work in Excel.
You have an incredible history with flights in the last year or two. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not going to travel with you ever.
I don't blame you. I wouldn't travel with me either if I'll be honest, at one point, this particular trip that I had to take, if you would have driven it, it's like a 7-hour drive. It absolutely crossed my mind at one point when I was sitting at the airport. I was like, I'm just gonna go rent a goddamn car. I'm gonna drive there myself at this point because yeah, it was wild. Crying to get on a flight, that's a first. I'm not ashamed to admit that I did it, and I'd do it again, to be quite honest, because it was very effective. Obviously, a tool you should not deploy all the time, but it was necessary at that point. But anyways, yes, good times.
Good times. Well, thank you very much to everyone for listening. There are full video versions of the podcast on YouTube at the Excel Files, and you can comment to give us some hot takes for the next hot takes. So tell us when your first moment in Power Query was, and we will see you next time on the Excel Files.
Hilariously, I gotta tell you guys this because it is funny. The other day I was trying to my flowers are blooming out front, and green things are not my forte. So I'm really proud of how far I've come with learning all of them. And I was I sent a picture of Hank laying in the front yard to my boss and the guy on my team, and made a comment about what was supposed to be green. I was like, oh, those are yellow tulips. Those are coming in probably a couple weeks here. And my boss goes, tulips are in the spring. Those aren't tulips. He's like, they're probably daylilies. Tried to prove him wrong, and I was like, well, let me pull up a picture from last year at some point to see what they actually were, and then I'll ask Gemini. So in Google Photos, I said, find me any pictures of yellow flowers from last year around this time. He returned a picture in the backyard taking a poop with dandelions. He's looking back at the camera, and he has this good ass grin on his face. He's laughing at me while he's taking a poop with yellow flowers, aka dandelions. And it's ridiculous. But I was like, I mean, Gemini did what I told it to, technically. So yeah.
Can we have
That's
that
amazing.
photo of Hank sheathing and giggling?
Pat Hanky's head, scratch his chin, scratch his belly. I got it. We're good.
Jim said, let's ungroup in mixed doubles. She dropped